The late afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption Creek as Silas Harker dragged his daughter through the crowd gathering outside the mercantile. Eliza stumbled behind him, her worn boots catching on the uneven planks, her face burning with shame as townspeople stopped to stare. At 15, she had learned to make herself small despite her larger frame, to disappear into corners and avoid her father's wrath. But today there would be no hiding. Silas's voice boomed across the square, thick with liquor and malice. "Come see what I've brought to trade," he announced, yanking Eliza forward by her wrist. "A strong girl, good for heavy work. Any man willing to take her off my hands gets a bargain." The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with the cruel fascination of spectators at a hanging. Women whispered behind gloved hands while their husbands assessed Eliza like livestock. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, willing herself not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her father had threatened this for months, ever since her mother died, but she had never believed he would actually go through with it. "She eats too much, costs too much," Silas continued, his grip tightening until Eliza winced. "But she's healthy enough, strong back for field work or whatever else a man might need." The implications in his tone made Eliza's stomach turn. A few men in the crowd laughed, the sound ugly and knowing. The sheriff stood nearby, arms crossed, making no move to intervene. In Redemption Creek, a man's family was his property, and the law rarely interfered with what happened behind closed doors or in public squares. "I'll take her." The voice cut through the murmurs like a blade, deep and steady. The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward from the shadows of the general store. Eliza looked up for the first time, her breath catching in her throat. The man was unlike anyone she had seen in town before, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with dark hair touching his collar and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore simple clothes, a worn leather vest over a homespun shirt. But there was something about his bearing that commanded attention. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to solitude and self-reliance. Silas's eyes narrowed with suspicion and greed. "You got something worth trading, mountain man?" The stranger's gaze never left Eliza's face, and for a moment she saw something unexpected there, not the hunger or cruelty she had learned to recognize, but something softer, almost sad. Then he turned to Silas, his expression hardening. "I have supplies in my wagon, flour, salt, coffee, dried meat, enough to see you through winter, if you're not too drunk to make it last." Caleb Hayes had ridden into Redemption Creek that morning with no intention of getting involved in the town's affairs. He came twice a year for supplies, conducted his business, and returned to his mountain homestead without fanfare. He preferred the company of pine trees and elk to the petty cruelties of civilization. But when he heard Silas Harker's voice carrying across the square, saw the girl's hunched shoulders and downcast eyes, something ancient and protective stirred in his chest. He had seen enough suffering in his 32 years, had caused some of it himself during the war, to recognize a soul in desperate need of sanctuary. The girl reminded him of the frightened animals he sometimes found caught in traps in the high country, eyes wide with pain and fear, waiting for the final blow. He had always freed those creatures when he could, knowing that some things were worth the risk of getting bitten. The crowd pressed closer now, sensing drama, Silas studied Caleb with the calculating look of a man weighing his options. The supplies Caleb offered were generous, more than he could earn in a season of hard work, and everyone knew Silas Harker was more interested in whiskey than responsibility. "Let me see what you got," Silas demanded. Caleb led him to the wagon without another glance at Eliza, though he was acutely aware of her standing alone in the square, trembling like a leaf in autumn wind. The wagon bed was indeed loaded with quality goods, 50-pound sacks of flour, salt pork wrapped in canvas, coffee beans, sugar, and even a bolt of calico cloth. Silas's eyes widened with avarice. "This is all for the girl?" "For your daughter," Caleb corrected, his voice carrying a warning edge. "And I want papers signed, legal and witnessed, showing she's in my custody now. I won't have you changing your mind and showing up at my door." Silas snorted. "You think I'd want her back? Take her with my blessing. The doc can write it up proper." Within an hour, papers were drawn, signed, and witnessed by 3 townspeople and the town doctor, who looked at Caleb with something between respect and concern. "You sure about this, Hayes? That girl's had a hard life. Might be more trouble than she's worth." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Every life is worth something, Doc. Maybe she just hasn't had the chance to prove it yet." As he loaded the last of his remaining supplies into the wagon, Caleb finally approached Eliza, who stood exactly where he had left her, as if afraid to move without permission. Up close, he could see the fading bruises on her arms, the hollow look of someone who had learned not to hope for kindness. She was young, too young, with a face that might have been pretty, if not for the shadows of fear and hunger that haunted it. "My name is Caleb Hayes," he said quietly, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel cornered. "I have a homestead about 15 miles north up in the high country. It's isolated and the work is hard, but you'll have your own space, your own privacy. I won't harm you, and I won't let anyone else harm you either. That's my promise, and I don't make promises lightly." Eliza stared at him, searching his face for the lie, the trap, the hidden cruelty. But his eyes were steady and kind, and something in her broken heart wanted desperately to believe him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Caleb considered the question, then said simply, "Because someone did it for me once, when I needed it. Now get in the wagon. We have miles to cover before dark." The wagon lurched forward, carrying Eliza away from the only town she had ever known, away from her father's house of horrors, toward a future she could not imagine. Behind them, the crowd dispersed, already moving on to the next scandal, the next tragedy. But for Eliza, leaving Redemption Creek felt like being pulled from drowning waters, even if she did not yet trust the hand that held her. The journey into the mountains began in heavy silence, broken only by the steady clop of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. Eliza sat as far from Caleb as the wagon bench allowed, her hands knotted in her lap, her body rigid with tension. Every instinct screamed that this was another trap, that the kindness in his eyes was just a prelude to something worse. Men did not trade valuable supplies for a girl like her without expecting something in return. Caleb seemed content with the quiet, his attention focused on guiding the horses along the narrow trail that climbed steadily away from the valley floor. The landscape changed as they ascended the scrubby plains giving way to pine forests, the air growing cooler and cleaner. Eliza had never been this far from town, and despite her fear, she found herself captivated by the wild beauty surrounding them. Hawks circled overhead, and somewhere in the distance a stream rushed over stones. As the sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb finally spoke. "There's a clearing about a mile ahead where we'll make camp for the night. Tomorrow we'll reach the homestead by midday." Eliza nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. The thought of spending a night alone with this stranger in the wilderness filled her with dread. But what choice did she have? Running would mean certain death in these mountains, and returning to her father was unthinkable. When they reached the clearing, Caleb worked efficiently to set up camp. He unhitched the horses and led them to the nearby stream, then gathered wood for a fire. Eliza watched from the wagon, uncertain whether she should help or stay out of the way. Her father had always mocked her attempts to be useful, and years of criticism had taught her to second-guess every action. "There's a tin pot in the back of the wagon," Caleb said without looking at her, "and coffee in the brown sack. If you know how to make coffee, that would be helpful. If not, I'll teach you." The simple request, offered without judgment, loosened something in Eliza's chest. She climbed down from the wagon, moving carefully, and found the pot and coffee. She did know how to make coffee her mother had taught her before she died, and the familiar task gave her shaking hands something to do. By the time the fire was crackling, casting warm light into the gathering darkness, Eliza had coffee brewing and was trying to figure out what else she might prepare for supper. Caleb returned from tending the horses with a cloth-wrapped package. "Salt pork and biscuits," he said, settling across the fire from her. "Not fancy, but it fills the belly." They ate in silence, but it was a different quality of silence now, less hostile and more companionable. Caleb's movements were calm and deliberate, and Eliza noticed that he was careful to keep the fire between them, maintaining a respectful distance. When the meal was finished, he stood and retrieved 2 bedrolls from the wagon. "You'll sleep here by the fire," he said, unrolling one blanket near the warmth. "I'll be over there, under that pine. If you need anything during the night, just call out. I'm a light sleeper." Eliza's eyes widened. "You're not?" "No," Caleb said firmly, understanding her unfinished question. "I told you in town you'll have your privacy and your safety. That starts now." He moved to the pine tree he had indicated, a good 20 feet away, and arranged his bedroll. Within minutes he was settled, his back against the trunk, his rifle across his lap. Eliza stood by the fire, uncertain and overwhelmed. This was not how she had expected this night to go. Every terrible scenario she had imagined on the journey from town was proving false, and she did not know how to process this unexpected mercy. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, though she was not sure he could hear her. "Get some rest," came his quiet reply. "Tomorrow's another long day." Eliza wrapped herself in the blanket, lying down near the fire's warmth. Above her, the sky was a river of stars, more than she had ever seen in town, where lamplight dulled their brilliance. The mountain night was full of sounds whined through pine needles, the distant call of an owl, the crackling fire, but for the first time in years, Eliza felt something other than fear. It was tentative and fragile, this feeling, but it was there, the smallest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could be something other than survival and suffering. She fell asleep, watching the firelight dance, Caleb's steady breathing from across the camp a strange comfort in the wilderness dark. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Eliza woke confused, momentarily forgetting where she was, then remembered with a jolt. She sat up quickly, her blanket falling away, and saw Caleb crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast with the efficient movements of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. "Morning," he said simply. "We'll eat, pack up, and be on our way. The trail gets steeper from here, but the horses are strong." The second day of travel revealed even more spectacular country. They climbed higher into the mountains, following trails that seemed barely wide enough for the wagon. Eliza gripped the seat as the wheels rolled along cliff sides that dropped away into dizzying emptiness, but Caleb's hands on the reins were steady and sure. He had clearly made this journey many times before. Around midday, the trail crested a ridge, and Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing down into a sheltered valley. "That's home." Eliza followed his gesture and caught her breath. Nestled in the valley below was a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, surrounded by cleared land. She could see a barn, a chicken coop, and neat garden plots, all protected by the embrace of forest-covered mountains. A stream ran through the property, catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful and isolated, a world unto itself. "It's been just me for 3 years now," Caleb said as he urged the horses forward. "Built most of it myself after I left the army. It's not fancy, but it's solid, and the land provides well if you treat it right." As they descended into the valley, Eliza studied the homestead with growing wonder. Everything spoke of careful planning and hard work, the straight fence lines, the well-tended garden, the tidy barn. This was not the rough camp of a transient prospector, but the established home of someone who intended to stay, to build a life. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the cabin and set the brake. "Come on, I'll show you around. Then you can settle into your space." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from the ridge, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, warmed by a massive stone fireplace. The furniture was simple, but well-crafted, a sturdy table, chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies. Caleb led her to a door at the back of the cabin. "This was meant to be a second bedroom," he said, opening it. "I've been using it for storage, but I cleared it out before I went to town. It's yours now." The room was small but private, with a real bed covered in clean quilts, a chest for belongings, and a window overlooking the stream. On the chest sat a basin and pitcher for washing. It was more than Eliza had ever had, more than she had dreamed possible. Her room at her father's house had been a corner of the attic, accessed by a ladder, with no heat in winter and stifling in summer. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Caleb nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You'll earn your keep, make no mistake. There's work to be done every day on a place like this, but the work is honest, and you'll be treated fair. Now, I imagine you're hungry. Let me put together some lunch while you look around and get your bearings." Over the next weeks, Eliza learned the rhythms of mountain life. Caleb was true to his word. The work was constant and demanding, but never cruel. He taught her how to milk the cow, collect eggs from the chickens, tend the vegetable garden that provided much of their food. She learned to churn butter, smoke meat, preserve vegetables for winter. Her hands, soft from disuse, grew calloused and strong. But more importantly, she learned to breathe again. Caleb never raised his voice, never lifted a hand in anger. When she made mistakes, and she made many in those early days, he corrected her patiently, showing her the right way without mockery or impatience. He treated her like a partner in the enterprise of survival, not a servant or a burden. They fell into an unspoken routine. Caleb woke before dawn to tend the animals and chop wood. Eliza prepared breakfast and packed lunch for days when Caleb worked in the far fields. They ate together in comfortable silence or easy conversation, then divided the day's tasks. Evenings were spent by the fire, Caleb mending tools or reading from his small collection of books. Eliza learning to sew properly or simply staring into the flames, marveling at her new reality. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Caleb noticed her watching him read. "You know your letters?" he asked. Eliza nodded. "My mother taught me before she died. I used to love reading, but my father—" She trailed off, the memory painful. Without a word, Caleb stood and retrieved a book from his shelf. "This is one of my favorites," he said, handing her a worn copy of poetry. "You're welcome to any of them." That night, Eliza read by firelight for the first time in years, and something long dormant in her soul began to wake. Words had always been her escape, her secret comfort. In the margins of her father's old ledgers, she had once written stories and poems, little windows into worlds where she was brave and free. She had thought that part of herself lost forever, but here, in this mountain sanctuary, it was returning. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Eliza found herself changing in ways both physical and profound. The constant work had strengthened her body, but more than that, the steady routine and adequate food had brought color to her cheeks and brightness to her eyes. She moved with more confidence now, no longer flinching at sudden movements or cowering from raised voices. The weight she carried no longer felt like shame, but simply part of who she was, strong, capable, alive. One afternoon, while Caleb was repairing the barn roof, Eliza discovered a cache of old paper and pencils in a trunk in the cabin. That evening, she shyly asked if she might use them. Caleb's face softened with something like pride. "Of course, they're just gathering dust otherwise." So Eliza began to write again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She wrote about the mountains, about the changing seasons, about the life she was building in this unlikely place. She wrote about fear and healing, about the kindness of a stranger who had become something like family. The words poured out of her, years of silence finding voice on the page. Caleb never asked to read what she wrote, respecting her privacy as he respected everything about her. But sometimes she would look up from her writing to find him watching her with a gentle smile, and she understood that he was pleased to see her finding joy in something beyond mere survival. Winter's first snow arrived in early November, transforming the valley into a wonderland of white silence. Caleb had prepared well, with the barn full of hay for the animals and the cabin stocked with preserved food and firewood. The cold drove them indoors for longer periods, and their evening conversations grew longer and deeper. Caleb spoke rarely of his past, but gradually Eliza pieced together his story. He had been a soldier in the war, had seen and done things that haunted him still. When the fighting ended, he could not return to his former life, could not bear the crowds and noise of cities. He had come west seeking peace, found this valley, and built a sanctuary where the nightmares came less frequently. He understood what it meant to need healing, which was why he had recognized that same need in her. For her part, Eliza found herself able to speak of her mother's death, of the slow transformation of her father from merely distant to actively cruel, of the years of isolation and fear. Caleb listened without judgment, offering no platitudes, just steady presence and understanding. One snowy evening in December, as they sat by the fire after supper, Eliza looked up from her writing. "Caleb," she said quietly, "why did you really take me from that town?" "The truth." He was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with memory. "During the war, I saw a lot of suffering. Some of it I caused, which I'll have to live with. But the worst was the suffering I saw and did nothing about, because I was following orders or because it wasn't my place to interfere." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting firelight and old pain. "I swore when I left that life behind, I would never again stand by and watch someone be hurt if I had the power to stop it. When I saw you in that square, saw what your father was doing, I knew I had to act. Not for any selfish reason, but because it was the right thing to do. Maybe the only right thing I've done in a long time." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved me," she whispered. "Maybe," Caleb allowed. "But you saved yourself, too, by being brave enough to take the chance, to trust when you had every reason not to. That takes more courage than anything I did." Winter deepened, wrapping the valley in profound silence broken only by wind and the occasional wolf howl in the distant peaks. Inside the cabin, warmth and companionship held the darkness at bay. Eliza continued to write, filling page after page with stories that she was beginning to think might be worth sharing beyond these walls. Caleb encouraged her, suggesting she might one day send them to newspapers or magazines in the cities. The idea thrilled and terrified her. Could her words, her stories, have value to others? Could she, broken and discarded as she had been, create something of beauty and meaning? In the quiet of her room at night, she dared to imagine a future where she was not defined by her father's cruelty or society's rejection, but by her own accomplishments and strength. February brought a brief thaw, melting enough snow to make travel possible again. Caleb decided to make a quick trip to the trading post 15 miles south to replenish a few essential supplies. "I'll be back by nightfall tomorrow," he told Eliza. "You'll be fine here. You know how to manage everything now." Eliza nodded, proud that he trusted her to maintain the homestead alone. She had come so far from the terrified girl who had arrived last autumn. As she watched him ride away on his sturdy mountain horse, she felt a pang of anxiety, but also confidence. She could handle one night alone. The day passed peacefully. Eliza tended the animals, brought in firewood, and spent the afternoon writing. As darkness fell, she locked the cabin door and settled by the fire with a book. The wind picked up outside, howling around the eaves, but she felt safe in the solid cabin Caleb had built. She was just preparing for bed when she heard it, the sound of horses, multiple horses, approaching through the night. Her heart seized with sudden fear. Caleb had taken the only horse. Who could be coming here in the dark? The answer came with brutal clarity when she heard her father's voice calling out, "Eliza, come out here, girl. I know you're in there." Terror flooded through her, the old fear rising like bile. Silas had come. Somehow, despite the signed papers, despite the distance and winter weather, he had found her. And he had not come alone. Through the window she could see torches, 4 or 5 men on horseback, and the glint of a badge on one man's chest. The sheriff from Redemption Creek. "Open this door!" Silas bellowed, pounding hard enough to shake the frame. "You're coming back with me, you hear? That mountain man had no right to take you." Eliza backed away from the door, her mind racing. The cabin was strong, but could she hold them off until Caleb returned? Did they have the authority to break in? The sheriff's presence suggested they believed they had legal grounds, though Eliza knew the papers had been proper and legal. "We have a court order," the sheriff called out, his tone officious. "Mr. Harker has declared that the agreement with Caleb Hayes was made under duress and is therefore invalid. The girl is underage and belongs with her legal guardian. Open the door or we'll break it down." Lies. It was all lies. Caleb had conducted everything properly, with witnesses. But Eliza knew how the world worked. Silas had money now, from selling Caleb supplies, and money could buy convenient lies from corrupt officials. Her father must have spent the winter drinking and gambling, and now that his funds were running low, he had decided to reclaim his property. Perhaps he planned to sell her again, this time for an even higher price. She would not go. The realization came with startling clarity. She would not go back to that life, to that man. She had tasted freedom, had remembered who she could be, and she would not surrender it, even if it cost her everything. With shaking hands, Eliza went to the cabinet where Caleb kept his rifle. He had taught her to shoot during the autumn, patient lessons in the meadow behind the cabin. She had never been great with it, but she knew how to load and fire. She checked that it was loaded, then moved to the window. "I'm not going with you," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have the legal papers. Caleb Hayes is my legal guardian now. You have no right to be here." Silas's laugh was cruel and mocking. "Legal guardian? He's a nobody, a hermit hiding in the mountains. I'm your father, and you'll do as I say." "No," Eliza said firmly. "I won't. Leave now, or I'll defend this property." She saw the men exchange glances, clearly not expecting resistance. The sheriff urged his horse forward. "Girl, don't be foolish. Put down any weapons and come peacefully. We don't want anyone hurt." "Then leave," Eliza repeated, raising the rifle to rest in the window frame, pointed skyward but ready. "This is my home now, and you're trespassing." For a tense moment, the standoff held. Then Silas, emboldened by whiskey and rage, dismounted and strode toward the door. "You ungrateful wretch, after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done!" Eliza's voice cracked with fury and pain. "You sold me like livestock. You starved me, beat me, told me every day that I was worthless. Caleb Hayes showed me more kindness in one day than you showed me in my entire life." Silas reached the door and began kicking at it, the old rage she knew so well taking over. "You're my daughter, my property. I'll teach you to defy me." The shot rang out, sharp and deafening, in the winter night. Eliza had fired into the air, a warning, but the effect was immediate. The horses spooked, dancing and whinnying. The men cursed, reaching for their own weapons. Silas stumbled back from the door, his face purple with rage. "She shot at me," he screamed. "You all saw it. She tried to kill me. Sheriff, arrest her!" But before anyone could move, another voice cut through the chaos, cold and hard as mountain stone. "Nobody moves. Hands where I can see them." Caleb emerged from the darkness beyond the torchlight, his rifle leveled at the group, his face a mask of controlled fury. He had returned early, taking a shortcut through the mountains, and had approached quietly enough to assess the situation before revealing himself. "Hayes," the sheriff said nervously, "we have legal authority." "You have lies and corruption." Caleb interrupted, not lowering his weapon. "I have signed documents properly witnessed, giving me legal custody of Eliza. Those papers are filed with the territorial court. Whatever Harker told you is a fabrication, and you're a fool if you believed him." That's not how Mr. Harker explained it. "Mr. Harker is a drunk and a liar who sold his own child," Caleb said flatly. "He has no legal claim here. Now, all of you are going to mount up and ride away from my property. If you ever come back, I'll treat you as the trespassers and threats you are, and I'll be within my rights to defend my home and my family." The word family hung in the cold air, and Eliza felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the danger. Caleb had called her family, not property, not burden, but family. Silas tried one more time, his voice wheedling. "Come now, Hayes. Surely we can work something out. The girl should be with her blood kin." "The girl," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something deadly, "has a name. Her name is Eliza, and she is under my protection. She stays here because she chooses to stay here, because this is her home. Your rights as a father ended when you traded her for supplies like she was a sack of flour. Now get off my land before I forget that I'm trying to be a civilized man." The sheriff, clearly recognizing that he was on shaky legal ground and facing an armed man who knew his rights, began backing his horse away. "This isn't over, Hayes. I'll take this to the territorial judge." "You do that," Caleb agreed. "The judge is an honest man, unlike some. He'll tell you exactly what I just did, that Eliza is legally my ward, and any attempt to remove her against her will is kidnapping. Now go." One by one, the men turned their horses and rode away into the darkness. Silas was the last to leave, throwing one final venomous look at the cabin. "This isn't finished," he spat. "I'll be back." "No," Caleb said quietly. "You won't? Because if you do, it won't be the sheriff you'll be dealing with. It'll be every person in this territory who despises men like you. Word will spread about what you did, Harker. You'll find that people remember, and they don't forget." When the last hoofbeat had faded into the distance, Caleb finally lowered his rifle and turned to the cabin. Eliza was already opening the door, tears streaming down her face, the rifle she had held so bravely now shaking in her hands. "I didn't know what to do," she sobbed. "I was so scared." Caleb took the rifle gently from her hands and pulled her into an awkward fatherly embrace. "You did exactly right," he said firmly. "You stood your ground. You defended your home. I'm proud of you." Those simple words, "I'm proud of you," broke something open in Eliza. She wept against Caleb's shoulder, releasing months of fear and pain, but also relief and gratitude. When she finally pulled away, wiping her eyes, she saw that Caleb's own eyes were suspiciously bright. "Will they really come back?" she asked. "I don't think so," Caleb said. "Your father has no legal standing, and the sheriff knows it. He was probably paid to come out here and intimidate us, but he won't risk his position for a man like Harker. Still, we'll take precautions. Tomorrow, I'll ride to the territorial office and file a formal complaint. We'll make sure there's a record of this attempted abduction." True to his word, Caleb spent the following week ensuring that their legal position was unassailable. He rode to the territorial office, met with the judge, and filed detailed accounts of both the original custody agreement and the attempted illegal seizure. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, was outraged by Silas's actions and issued an order barring him from approaching Caleb's property or making any further claims on Eliza. But more than that, word of what had happened spread through the mountains and valleys. The isolated homesteaders and small settlements of the territory had their own form of justice, and they did not look kindly on men who abused their children or tried to circumvent the law. Silas Harker found himself increasingly unwelcome in the places he once frequented, his reputation destroyed by his own greed and cruelty. As winter gave way to spring, the threat that had loomed over their peaceful existence gradually receded. Caleb taught Eliza more skills: how to read the weather, how to track game, how to find medicinal plants in the forest. She grew stronger and more confident, her writing flourishing as she documented the world around her with increasing skill and insight. One warm afternoon in April, as they worked together to plant the spring garden, Eliza paused and looked at Caleb. "Can I ask you something?" "Always," he said, leaning on his shovel. "What do you see when you look at me? Not at the beginning, when you first saw me in town. But now, what do you see?" Caleb considered the question seriously. "I see someone who survived what would have broken most people. I see strength and resilience. I see a talented writer who has stories worth telling. I see someone who has earned the right to choose her own path in life." He smiled. "What do you see when you look at yourself?" Eliza thought about it, really thought about it. A year ago, she would have said she saw nothing but what her father had told her: she was worthless, burdensome, ugly. But now, "I see someone who's still learning who she is," she said slowly. "Someone who's grateful for a second chance. Someone who wants to be brave enough to share her voice with the world." "Then do it," Caleb encouraged. "Send your stories to those newspapers and magazines we talked about. Let people read them. Your words have power, Eliza. Don't hide them away." That evening, Eliza carefully selected 3 of her best stories, tales of resilience, of finding hope in dark places, of the healing power of kindness. She packaged them with a cover letter and asked Caleb to post them when he next went to the trading post. Her hand shook as she sealed the envelope, but she felt a thrill of excitement too. This was her voice, her truth, going out into the world. Summer arrived with abundance. The garden flourished, the chickens laid prolifically, and Caleb's small herd of cattle grew. Eliza had become an essential part of the homestead's operation, her contributions equal to Caleb's own. They worked side by side in companionable partnership, and the cabin that had once been just Caleb's refuge had become a true home for them both. In late August, a letter arrived at the trading post, forwarded from one of the magazines Eliza had contacted. With trembling hands, she opened it, hardly daring to hope. As she read, her eyes widened with disbelief and joy. "They want to publish one of my stories," she breathed, looking up at Caleb with wonder. "They're going to pay me for it." Caleb's face split into a genuine smile, rare and warm. "Of course they are. I told you, your words have power." Over the following months, more letters arrived. More publications wanted Eliza's work. Her stories of life in the mountains, of healing and redemption, resonated with readers across the territory and beyond. She began to receive letters from readers, women who had survived their own hardships, men who had found their way back from war, children who dreamed of the wild country she described so vividly. Eliza discovered that her voice, which had been silenced for so long, could reach out across distances and touch hearts. Her story, the painful parts and the hopeful parts, became a source of encouragement for others. She wrote about her father's cruelty not for revenge, but to show that survival was possible. She wrote about Caleb's kindness to demonstrate that good people existed, that rescue could come from unexpected places. As autumn painted the mountains gold for the second time since her arrival, Eliza stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set behind the peaks. Caleb joined her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, and they stood in comfortable silence, appreciating the beauty of their hard-won peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked quietly. "Taking me from town that day? Your life was simpler before." Caleb shook his head. "Simpler, maybe, but not better. This place was just a hiding spot before you came. Now it's a home. You made it that." Eliza smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle in her bones. This was home not because of the cabin or the mountains, though she loved both dearly, but because here she was valued, respected, and free to become whoever she was meant to be. Inside the cabin, pages of her newest story waited on the table, ready to be sent out into the world. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Winter would come again, as it always did in the mountains, but Eliza no longer feared the cold. She had learned that even in the harshest seasons, warmth could be found and light could be kindled. She had learned that healing begins in the smallest acts of kindness, in the daily choice to treat someone with dignity and respect. She had learned that her father's judgment of her worth was not the final word on who she was or who she could become. Most importantly, she had learned that family was not always blood. Sometimes it was the person who saw you at your lowest and offered you a hand up instead of kicking you further down. As the stars multiplied overhead and the mountain night wrapped around them, Eliza felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been sold like property, discarded by the man who should have protected her. But in that moment of deepest despair, she had been seen by someone who recognized her humanity, her value, her potential. Caleb had not rescued her because he wanted something from her. He had rescued her because it was right, and in doing so, he had given her the space to rescue herself. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, a sanctuary where broken things could mend, where silence could give way to song, where the discarded could discover they were treasures after all. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of snow to come. Inside the cabin, the fire would burn bright and warm. Tomorrow would bring new work, new stories to write, new reasons to be grateful for the life she had claimed for herself in this wild, beautiful place. Eliza wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling its warmth seep into her palms, and smiled into the gathering dark. She was home. She was safe. She was free. And that was a story worth telling, worth living, worth celebrating every single day.